Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Quover, and today David Warner Mathisen is back, and we are going to talk a little bit about Troy and what it has to tell us. David's website is starmythvision.com. He is an author and a researcher, and I'm very happy that he's back. So, David, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Judith. It's great to be here again with you and all your, night flight community throughout the world. So hello to everybody who's listening, and thanks for having me back.
So, yeah, of course you come now.
I have this effect on a lot of cats, actually.
Yeah. She has been sleeping for hours. The second I start talking here, that is, attention has to be on her all the time.
I have a cat just like that.
So with Troy, it's a little bit different than with other myths because we found Troy. Or didn't we?
Well, that's an interesting question. I can show you that all the events in the Trojan War, or the vast majority of the events in the Trojan War, are based on the constellations and the stars, and we'll talk about that, in common with a worldwide system, in common with the stories of all the different continents of the world, all the different sacred traditions, including the stories in the Bible are based on the stars, stories from ancient Egypt, other parts of Africa, Australia, ancient India, all use the same system, and we'll see a little bit about that. So did I guess it's Heinrich Schliemann or Schliemann, okay, found the ruins of Troy and used the text of the Iliad to help him find, of course, in ancient times it was called Ilium or Ilion, fair Ilium, and that's why it's called the Iliad, the Song of Ilium. And to me, this story is about, if it's based on the stars, it's metaphorical. It's not historical. And the same can be said for the stories in the Bible. That doesn't mean they are not teaching profound truths, but to try and find Troy, to me, it's like, the movie The Matrix. You're probably familiar with The Matrix. Everyone's familiar with The Matrix. Is there truth in The Matrix? Yes. But do we have to say, I need to figure out where Neo lived so that I can wake up like Neo, or, in thousands of years, maybe somebody will get a hold of the movie, The Matrix, and they'll become obsessed with figuring it out, and they'll follow all the details of the movie, and they'll do some archaeology, and they'll find Chicago, and they'll say, this is where Neo was, right here in Chicago. And, us today would say, maybe it was kind of like Chicago, but I don't even think Neo was really in any specific city. This is about a metaphor of Neo and Morpheus and Trinity and this matrix that we're in. But no, somebody in the future says, I've found the ruins of Neo's apartment. And here's I even found his computer where he got that message that said, wake up, Neo. Look, there's a ruined computer right here. I've found the matrix. To me, that's what happened with somebody found a ruin and they said, this matches up with this magical book, this majestic poem. The poem is as fictional and yet as true as any other of the ancient myths, just as, whatever your favorite movie is fictional, but it's speaking to you with profound truth. That's what's going on in the Iliad. So I don't get all hung up over whether Schliemann really found Troy or not. Maybe he did. But whoever wrote that book was writing whoever wrote that poem, and I think it's even much more ancient than Homer. These patterns, this system, was not doing something historical with that poem.
When I looked at what, let's say, mainstream archaeology has to say about this, There are many voices out there that say there is no clear evidence that in that city that we call Troy has ever been a war. So that is where a lot of people say, yeah, okay, that's so something fishy is going on here. That's probably, so that could mean that if there was a war and there is no sign of it, so that could mean that you are right and it's not Troy.
Yeah, actually, the fact that all the figures in the myths and in the poem of the Iliad match up with the stars has tremendous implications for academia. Now, they haven't so far availed themselves of engaging with my work too much, but maybe some listener has a friend who's a professor in the Department of Classics there in Berlin or somewhere, but and they might want to take a look at it. But it has tremendous implications for all these kinds of questions. And I was thinking about all that. There's all kinds of mistakes, I think, that we make by treating a lot of ancient texts as if they're historical, when really they are clearly esoteric and metaphorical, and speaking in celestial metaphor. So, yeah, I was thinking about, I was reading something, maybe it was on the internet, about the Iliad, and they were trying to, oh, well, this has never been figured out, whether Achilles and Patroclus, was that a homoerotic, or were they just warrior buddies? We can talk about that. No, it's esoteric. It's a metaphor. There's all kinds of questions that you'll find on the internet. I just saw something. It was really a ridiculous interpretation. I was looking at it and I said, well, that's just a mistake. If they understood that it's celestial, that wouldn't even be on the internet anymore. I can't remember specifically what it was. Maybe it'll come to me, but this does have tremendous implications for that. But one of the first questions people ask me about when I start talking about the Bible being based on the stars, or one of the most frequent questions, is, well, couldn't it also have happened and be in the stars? Sure, could have. Over and over and over again, people could have lived out their lives over and over and over again, matching out the stars. For that, you almost have to admit, divine providence making people's lives match up with the stars over and over, or making the stars match up with specific historical events. But I think it's much more likely that this is metaphorical. It's celestial, it's metaphorical. Whether, sometimes those stories get put onto real places, and maybe even real names of real kings, and Agamemnon or Menelaus, maybe there were people named that, but in the poem itself, it is very clearly celestial. And we'll show that. Before we go too far, I should probably show it, because listeners might be saying, what is he talking about? It's all based on the stars. But I can show that. But it's a great question. I mean, it's a good jumping off point about whether it could also be historical too. I personally don't find any evidence. It's like the burden of proof is on the archaeologist to show that it's also historical, because I can show you that it's celestial.
So I know that in Greek mythology, Aquarius is associated with Troy. And but the Babylonians, they cataloged it in their star maps as Ea himself. So is that something where you can jump in and?
Well, that's a great set of discussions there. So I think you can still see Troy to this day. Everybody can go outside at night and see Troy, and you can see Troy raised down to the ground, and you can see the walls of Troy come falling down and go level to the ground, because the stars rise up and sink down. Now, Aquarius is very close to the feature that I think is Troy itself. And Aquarius is a really important constellation that plays a lot of different figures, including gods and also warriors. And I'll show the outline of Aquarius and why Aquarius fits in with certain characteristics. So yeah, so the ancient Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Ea, but in Sumerian, there's Enki and Enlil. Enki means Lord Mound, I believe. The god, and Ki means a mound or a mountain, and Enlil means Lord Wind, or the god who's associated with a wind. And those two figures, I believe, are related to some other constellations that I'll show you. But Enki, which is Lord Mound, or the mountain, that constellation that is a mountain is also strangely associated with Aquarius. So it's like they're both together. Enki, Ea, different names. There was different languages in that Mesopotamian, and I'm not an expert in ancient Assyrian, but there was the Assyrian language, the Babylonian language, and then the Sumerian language is not related to anything. It was like before, and that's how they figured it out. They had these clay tablets, and they were translating them, and they said, well, this is a Semitic language, Babylonian. It's related to Hebrew. But this writing system is clearly not designed for a Semitic language. It's not, the actual, if you wanted to design a writing system for one of the Semitic families of languages, you wouldn't do it this way. And so they started to say, maybe there's this more ancient culture, but actually it's an interesting little historical metaphor too, because you had other professors saying that's ridiculous. There's nothing before, stop making up these Sumerians. Well, it turned later on, and there was even there was one professor who really fought against it for his whole career, saying this whole Sumerian, ridiculous. There's no Sumerians who were before the Babylonians. Well, this whole system of ancient myth and ancient stars points to the existence of some more ancient culture, just like Graham Hancock and the late great John Anthony West and Robert Schoch and all those researchers talk about. Look at these archaeological pyramids. Look at the precision with which some of these artifacts in ancient Egypt are made. There must have been some culture that not only was advanced, but they must have had power tools to make these make these stones, because this is a mistake that if they were doing it by manual power, they would have just stopped. But if they had some kind of power tool, that's why the saw kept going at this angle. There must have been some, but modern conventional history, historians in academia say, oh, it's ridiculous. There was no advanced culture before long before the Egyptians. It's just like the Sumerian thing. Anyway, so your question about Aquarius, let's get into Aquarius. Aquarius, I believe, is associated with certain characteristics in this esoteric system, this alphabet. And it's probably better once I start showing some slides to talk about it. But let's maybe just put a thumbtack in Aquarius as a character, as a figure, and as a god. There's gods in the Greek myths who are also associated with Aquarius, and they have the same kind of characteristics. So I'm being a little bit cagey. I want to show some things, but that's a great question. That's a great question. So I want to address Aquarius as we get into it. But that's great. That's great. And the city of Troy is right next to Aquarius, so we'll see it. Yeah. So I guess your original, I just wanted to, kind of ask maybe your exposure to the story of the Trojan War and the Iliad. Did you learn it growing up in school? Did you, love the Iliad when you were little? You said you were just thinking about it recently because you were rewatching, the movie about it.
I rewatched the movie after a couple of years. And and I had to think of you.
Because of Brad Pitt, right?
And I thought,
you were watching the one with Brad
David
Pitt.
has to say about this.
Right. No, I've never watched that movie actually.
Okay.
I've never watched the Odyssey or the Iliad. These more recent kind of ones because I just have this, certain images in my mind, and sometimes I'm hesitant to like watch it, but I shouldn't be like that. I was like that with the J.R.R. Tolkien, the Middle Earth, the Lord of the Rings. But later, when I finally watched it, I said, "Oh, this is a great adaptation."
Mm.
But I've never actually watched that movie. But yeah, the whole thing's based on the stars. I can show you some. I can show you some images if you're ready. But I just was wondering, is this something that you've like? I really loved the Odyssey even when I was little. I always loved the Odyssey, and I even like in sixth grade, I tried to write my own epic poem. Like made up all my own characters and stuff. I just kind of grew up loving those. I was just wondering, kind of, is it
Um,
something that's really
I,
emphasized in the school, or?
um, yes and no.
Mm,
Um, I can't say that it was a big subject, the Iliad or the Odyssey, that it wasn't. But, I was going to school at a time. To them, it was very, very important that we did the entire Nazi time
mm,
twice in
mm,
1 year.
mm,
We stopped, and then the second term,
mm,
everything again with the documentary films about opening the concentration camps, and so that was really hammered into our brains. Yeah.
mm,
So yeah, they were busy doing that.
mm. Well, I'll set that aside, but the control of history is certainly extremely, extremely, George Orwell said, whoever controls the past controls the present,
Yeah.
and whoever controls
I
the
I
present
have
controls the future,
another
something
thing
like
that,
that. Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
I have another thing that I stumbled on, and uh, Hector and Paris. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I found, there is something that is called the Hercules Family, a group of 19 constellations. Um, and those constellations, then they make up this Hercules family. And interestingly enough, the mother of Hector had 19 children. So I thought,
Hmm. That's really interesting.
because these constellations, that is Sagitta, not to be confused with Sagittarius,
Sagittarius.
Aquila, Lyra, Cygnus, Velpecula, I don't know how to pronounce it,
Vulpecula, maybe.
Hydra,
Yeah.
Sexton, Crater
Hmm.
of Eucus, Centaurus, Lupus, Serpens, Santum, yeah, 19, and she had 19 children. And to me, that's no coincidence.
Right. So Hector is the Prince of Troy. He's the strongest fighter on the side of Troy, and his parents were Priam and Hecuba, Queen Hecuba and King Priam. And so I'm interested in whose interpretation, the 19, the Hercules family. I haven't actually run across that, 19 constellations. You could probably kind of designate what you want as being in the family, but those are constellations that you mentioned that are in the vicinity of Hercules, an extremely important constellation. In fact, the one that I usually start with, and the one that I will start with when I show some slides here, but that's very interesting about 19 children and somebody designating the Hercules family as having 19 in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll get into the identity of Hector, because he's really a very, Iliad, the Iliad itself is a tragedy in many ways, and Hector is a tragic figure. He's a very dignified, compassionate, just respectful to others, even though he has a lot of reason to be resentful of his brother Paris, for instance, who causes this whole problem. Paris is lack of judgment causes the whole Trojan War, and we'll get into that too. And when the Iliad opens, the Trojan War has been going for 9 years, and Troy is, not in great shape because of this war that's been going for 9 years. And Paris is like, he's actually a fairly good fighter, but he's half the time he wants to hang back in the city and hang out with the beautiful Helen of Troy. And so all the warriors resent Paris, call him names behind his back, say he's not much of a fighter. And Hector, who is by far the greatest, there's only one fighter on either side who can come close to Hector, and that's Achilles on the other side. So Hector, nobody disrespects Hector. He's always out there fighting. He's always doing his duty. He's always treating everybody with respect. Helen sees him as her main protector within the city, because you can imagine they would resent Helen too for bringing this whole war down on the city. But Hector's always she's always saying how much she respects and loves Hector, and maybe they're, but there's no sign that they ever have an affair, but it seems like they like each other. But Hector says to Paris, I hate it that everyone talks behind your back that you're a bad warrior, because I know you're actually a good warrior, but I wish you would just, figure it out. Let her go. She's somebody else's wife. You're bringing this whole city down. And Paris says, I know. This is going to, my parents, my city, everything's going to probably go up, and I know I should give her back, but I just can't. And Hector, and Hector, sometimes he kind of yells at Paris, but he always says, I know you can't. I understand, he understands Paris's weakness, and he's compassionate. He's like, I know you're different than me. I'm all about duty, doing my duty. You're just put together different than me. And he doesn't, he's like, you should straighten up. But he's like, I understand that you can't give her up. It's a really tragic story. It's a gigantic, that's why it's so powerful. I think it speaks to us today. Every time I read the Iliad and the Odyssey, especially the Odyssey, I see something different. And as you go through kind of different stages of life, when I was 15 and reading the Odyssey, different things resonated with me. When you have your own family and then you're reading it, you're seeing it from a different perspective, that kind of thing. So these are just really powerful. And I always say to people, the Bible is based on the stars. The Odyssey is based on the stars. All the ancient myths are based on the stars. If you want, the Odyssey could be your Bible, and you would have you could get the same profound messages from these ancient poems that are just part of the treasure that was given to humanity. So.
Okay, then go ahead and start with the slides wherever you think is best.
Okay, great. So I will share my screen and let me know when it's showing up, and share. And let's see here. It should be showing up now. Great. So just to set the stage, not to, I'm not, of course, I'm promoting my books, but I'm really showing where this discussion is found. I've been exploring the connection between the myths and the stars really since about 2009. So about 12 years now, as I started researching that one in the bottom corner, 2011, the Mathisen corollary. And then I was actually still taking the Bible literally when I published that one in 2011. In between 2011 and 2014 is when I really started to see not only are the ancient myths from other cultures based on the stars, but the stories in the Bible are based on the stars. So in between that 3 years, I was going through a major change in my own life where I had to either, believe. I could have closed my eyes and said, no, the Bible's not based on the stars. But the more evidence I found, I had to change, some very things that I believed very deeply. But now I realize the Bible's based on the stars too. So 2014, The Undying Stars was the first book that really...
by the way, I had today I found the first book of your star myth, the first part of that. I found that on Amazon for 570 euros.
Yeah, that's because I basically took it out of print. That's
Ah, okay.
so I did so after The Undying Stars, then I wrote that first one in 2015. It was called Star Myths Volume 1.
Mm.
And then Star Myths Volume 2 was Greek myths, Star Myths Volume 3, the Bible, Star Myths Volume 4, the Norse myths that you see up in the upper right-hand corner there. After 2018, I realized, some of the things in the first one, I'm still learning. I'm continuing to learn. I wanted to rewrite it. So that one that you see in the upper left, the Ancient Worldwide System, Star Myths of the World, Volume 1, second edition, I kind of expanded that one that you found on Amazon
Okay.
for so much. So that's most, you know, here and there's been different interpretations where I look back and say, I think today I would say that differently, or today I might interpret that a little differently, but I wouldn't take any of them off the shelf. I think they're still all enough valid in there, except that first one, I wanted to rewrite it because there were some things in there where I said, I've expanded my understanding so much that I want to just redo it. So that's Star Myths Volume 1, second edition, the Ancient Worldwide System that you see in the upper left. So I kind of, took the other one out of print, basically, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's costing so much. But when you do see them for so much on Amazon, you can buy them on my website. Of course, for me to ship it to Europe, it costs a ton for me to ship from the US to Europe because we could get into political discussions about how they're charging too much at the post office here. But that's part of austerity and neoliberalism, which I am very much against. But anyway, today's discussion, the reason I put this up here is to show that Star Myths of the World Volume 2, this is where I do discuss the Iliad. So much of what we'll discuss today is in this book. That's from 2016. And then the one book that I didn't have up there, my most recent one, is Myth and Trauma. And we've talked about this in previous shows. That's from 2020. So we won't go, I just wanted to show that. Now, I've made a whole video about this cup. This is a cup that's a Maya cup from the Maya of Central America, the Maya civilization. This is from the 600s or the 700s, or I guess it's the 700s or the 800s AD. And when I say that the myths are based on the stars, this is what I'm talking about. The gods and goddesses, the kings and the queens like Priam and Hecuba, or Hector and Helen of Troy and Achilles, can be shown to match up with specific constellations. And the specific constellations have connotations. There's a code. And you can see it in the texts themselves, in the stories themselves. You can also see it in the artwork. Just because it's in the artwork doesn't really prove it for the texts, but it's so visual and so powerful that I like to show the artwork to show people what I'm talking about. So this is a rain god, and I'm going to relate back to the Greek myths where they have, a thunder god as well. This is the god Chalk, who's a rain god, and he carries this axe, and he's shown in this cup in this lunging posture. You can see it, and maybe I should minimize my, I don't know if I can get it. I'm not blocking it with my.
No, I
Okay,
can
good.
see everything. Okay.
Great. So he's got this specific lunging posture, and I've shown this before, but it's very, I think, graphic and grabs people. And I haven't shown this rain god, I don't think, to you before, because someone sent me a link to this and said, hey, this looks like it matches up with a constellation. And he mentioned the constellation, and I said, that's right. I agree. In fact, it's so amazing, I'm going to do a whole video about it. But look at the lunging posture with one leg kind of extended, heel raised. He's holding, when one arm, a weapon over his back. In this case, it's an axe. That's the axe head with the arrow that I pointed to. So that's over his back. His other arm is reaching forward, and that's important, a forward-reaching arm. And in this case, he's grasping kind of a disc-shaped stone of some sort. But the important thing is that it's round in shape. He's also, so there's the disc-shaped thing that he's holding with his forward arm. He's also wearing this loincloth, like a knotted loincloth around his waist, and it's got kind of a tail coming off of it with a tuft on the end. I'll just kind of outline the tail of the loincloth with a little tuft at the end right there, you can see.
Mhm.
So these are characteristic features of a specific constellation in the sky that is found around the world in artwork for deities that match up with this constellation. And there's a deity from ancient Greece, and we know who it is because the ancient Greek artist has even put the name of the god right there for us, or at least someone who maybe the scribe came along after the artist and wrote the name, but that is Zeus. The thing that looks like a letter I is in ancient Greek Z.
Mhm.
And he's got his thunderbolt over his shoulder instead of an axe, but it's the same. Look, Zeus is a thunder god. Chalk is a rain and cloud god. Zeus has this extended rear leg right there, just like Chalk, with the heel raised. He's got a weapon over his back with one arm, and then the other arm is reaching forward.
Mhm.
And this posture matches up with a constellation in the sky. I'm going to show Hercules. I'm glad that you already mentioned the family of Hercules, because this constellation Hercules that you mentioned matches up with the hero Heracles. So there's a difference between the name of our constellation. When I say this is a Hercules figure, there's lots of different figures who match up with that constellation. We happen to call it Hercules, and that's because the ancient hero Heracles or Hercules does match up with that constellation, but so does Zeus. And by the way, Hercules is the son of Zeus. But you can see, once again, the same posture, leg extended, heel raised, arm over his shoulder with a weapon. The vase kind of curves away, so we can't see the weapon too easily, but I think it's a sword. He's actually fighting the Amazon leader of the Amazon warrior women, was one of his 12 labors of Hercules. He had to do 12 labors because he slew his whole family in a fit of rage. He went insane and slew his whole family. So he had to do these 12 labors. That's kind of a penance. But there he is with one weapon over his shoulder and then the other arm reaching forward. Now he's not grasping a disc, but we can see kind of an arc-shaped crest on the helmet of the warrior woman. I think that's Hippolyta or Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. Anyway, he had to bring back her belt, was one of the labors, but she has this curved crest you can see right there.
Mhm.
So his arm is close to the crest, not exactly grasping it in this one, but let's look at this one here. This is another Hercules, same posture. Oh, there's that tail. I forgot to point out, Hercules is often wearing this lion skin. See the tail of the lion skin with the tuft at the end
Mhm.
that I just circled in the lower one, and I put an arrow next to it in the middle picture there. That the tail of the lion often ends in a little tuft, just like we saw with Chalk, interestingly enough. And in this case, again, Hercules has the weapon over his shoulder, and he is actually grasping the crest on the helmet of the warrior that he's fighting. And I've circled it there, but it's kind of small, so I'll make it bigger. You can see the hand. Hopefully it's not being covered up in the picture, because I know we're up in the corner looking down. Can you see it on your screen?
Yes, I can see that.
See how he's holding the crest?
Mhm.
So there's a constellation that is why Chalk is holding this circular disc. Hercules is holding this crest, or is at least reaching out towards this crest. And that constellation is Hercules. That's the constellation Hercules.
Mm.
This is the outlining of Hercules as outlined by H.A. Rey. I know we've talked about H.A. Rey probably on, previous conversations, the author of Curious George, along with his wife, Margaret Rey. And Margaret Rey was actually the daughter of a member of the Reichstag.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, they moved to New York after to Greenwich Village and wrote the Curious George books. And in 1952, H.A. Rey wrote The Stars, A New Way to See Them. This is his outlining of Hercules, but he called it The Stars, A New Way to See Them. But I would argue that it's also an ancient way to see them. So I just outlined a constellation right next to Hercules. I was talking and I pressed the button. I should have waited a second. But do you see right above Hercules, there's this arc of stars, this very distinctive arc, and that is called the northern crown, or in Latin, corona borealis,
yeah.
crown of the north. Borealis means of the north. I think there's a podcaster named Al Borealis. Do you know Al Borealis? I think he's in Norway or somewhere. But corona borealis means crown of the north, and it's right next to Hercules. It's so close to his lower. See how Hercules has an extended rear leg, exaggerated lunging posture, heel raised, one arm holding a weapon over his back, other arm reaching forward a little below the crest of corona borealis, but could be envisioned as grasping corona borealis. And let's just fade back to chalk again. You see how well that artwork matches up with Hercules and corona borealis? The grasping, the circular grasping, the corona borealis is seen in the stars, and then it's seen in the artwork, and it's seen in the mythology. The gods and the heroes and the princesses and the queens match up with constellations, and it's a whole system. It's not just a puzzle. These different constellations have different connotations. Hercules is often the most powerful god, often a thunder god, a sky god, a god with a thunderbolt or a thunder axe. There's a god of the Yoruba of Western Africa named Shango, who's also a thunder god with a big square beard, just like Zeus has a square beard. And Shango also has an axe, a thunder axe. Oh, and then over here to the left on your screen of Hercules, I've labeled the star Vega, a very bright star close to Hercules. You see that Vega right there on the left?
Yes.
That is important. So I'll show one more piece of artwork, and then I'll say what Vega's importance is. Just focus on Vega there for a second, and then look down in the lower right. Have I talked about this on your show? I don't think so.
No,
The
not
Pylos.
yet.
Yeah, this is
I
the.
have just one.
Oh yeah, go
question.
ahead. Go ahead.
Here, this Hercules corona borealis. That
Yeah.
is, if I'm not mistaken, the most eastern part of the Cygnus constellation.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So Cygnus is a swan, and
Yes.
Cygnus is basically on the left side of our screen. Now, you know, there may be some reference in the 1800s where some, you know, astronomer, or they used to call them uranographers, who were sketching out the constellations, grouped corona borealis with the swan of Cygnus, because they're about the same, you know, elevation above the celestial equator. Cygnus would be off to the left. So somebody may have made that reference somewhere in some, you know, and maybe there is some kind of literary connection between them, but it's a different constellation, and I don't think of them as being related, but they're very close to Hercules. So Hercules represents Zeus, right? There's Zeus. So anyway, where were you going with that question? I kind of cut you off.
No, I was just thinking where we are right now, but it's okay. I got it. Got
so
it.
Cygnus is right next to Hercules, and so is Aquila the eagle. You mentioned that in the family of Hercules. So Zeus is often accompanied by an eagle. An eagle is associated with Zeus, and Zeus one time famously seduces a mortal woman by turning himself into the shape of a swan. And there's a swan right next to it, and he descends down to Leda, and there's the ancient story of Leda and the swan, and that's how the hero twins of Castor and Pollux are born. Zeus is always having affairs, intimate affairs with mortal women, and in one case he takes on the shape of a swan, other cases he takes on different shapes, but those all are celestial as well. So corona borealis there. So so it's a good point, a little bit of a tangent, but not really a tangent, because it illustrates this system that's going on. And this piece of artwork that I'm showing in the lower right-hand corner of the screen is called the Pylos Combat Agate. It was only uncovered recently. It was only shown to the world in 2017. This is actually, I'll put the name, the Pylos Agate. It was found in Pylos in the Peloponnese, on the western edge of the Peloponnese in Greece, modern day Greece. And it was in a tomb that had lain undisturbed since 1500 BC. And it still had the warrior inside. It's called the Tomb of the Griffin Warrior. A young man, about 33 years old, was buried with about 3,000, artifacts. And this was one of them. And it's only 3.5 centimeters across. So that artifact is only 3.5 centimeters across. And look at the detail on this. It was covered with limestone and grime from lying in this tomb for 3,500 years. But when they cleaned it off, they were astonished. And you can find articles about this in, major magazines saying this should, with the archaeologists saying this should change our understanding of ancient artwork. And I totally agree. And it's based on the stars. Look at that extended rear leg again with the heel raised. Then we've got the one arm over the back with a weapon. And then we've got a reaching forward arm. And what's he grasping? A crest, a circular crest of the helmet of the warrior that he's about to kill with his sword there. I call that warrior the spearman. There's a constellation right underneath Hercules, Ophiuchus, who almost always has a spear, and we'll talk about that. So look at that. This wasn't even found until 2017. I'd already written those books, saying, and so as soon as I saw this, I wrote to the archaeologists who discovered it and said, this is based on the stars. Let me show you. And, the academics usually kind of say, that's very interesting. Thanks for sending me that. And that's basically all that ever comes out of that. But this is, so I'm a little disappointed. I think that every university should be exploring this, but maybe eventually they will. But anyway, the Pylos agate, this is showing, I almost forgot the punchline. So look at the sword, the scabbard of that warrior. He's got a scabbard sticking out from his waist. You see how there's like a ball at the end of it? That's Vega. The constellation Hercules is next to this bright star Vega. It's in a different constellation, Lyra, the lyre, a harp that they, like a miniature harp, the lyre that King David played, or that Orpheus plays. Figures who are associated with Hercules will often play a lyre. Anyway, that's why all these figures, from chalk to Hercules to this figure in the Pylos combat agate, will have something sticking out from their waist, either a loincloth or a lion's tail with a tuft at the end of it, or a scabbard in this case with a ball at the end of it, right in the position of Vega. And you can see that ancient artist put it, it lines right up. Sometimes it's kind of a wavy line, like the tail of the lion's tail. So I made it kind of a wavy line there. So you can imagine these different connecting lines that the ancients would sometimes use in their myths. Now, that's just by way of kind of introduction, because we want to talk about the Trojan War, but I want to show, I'm moving towards the Trojan War in just one second. I want to show another story. This is from the Bible, from the book of First Kings. This is the famous, maybe we've talked about it a little, the famous judgment of Solomon, where there's the two women who have had two babies, and one baby has died. You can see it down there below, the woman in blue. One baby's still alive, and they're both arguing over whose it is. And Solomon says, okay, I can't figure out which one of these two is telling the truth. So I've got a solution. Just cut the baby in half, give one half to each one.
Yeah, what a stupid decision.
But
I'm so not impressed by that.
You're not impressed by this decision. But Judith, it's esoteric. It's not literal. So in the picture, do we see a giant, powerful looking warrior with a big beard holding a sword over his back? And in his other hand, that's kind of reaching forward, what's he grasping? A baby.
Yeah.
That's arching. It's an arc. It's just like what we were seeing in the constellations, where the baby is arching. This one is, I'm going to show you just a couple of these because to me it's so intriguing. This one's painting more recent by Tissot in the late 1800s, but the baby is arching. This is another Hercules figure, and that baby is Corona Borealis, which, when you look at the arc of stars of Corona Borealis, I see a necklace, I see a crown. I don't immediately imagine an arching baby, but this is found in a lot of myths. This Hercules figure grasping an arc could be a powerful Hercules figure grasping an arching baby. There's Hercules. There's the crown, Corona Borealis. There's Hercules grasping Corona Borealis. And you see this over and over. This one's actually by the famous artist Raphael, 14,
Oh, yeah.
late 1400s. Again, we have the Hercules figure holding the arc and obviously weapon in the other hand over the shoulder. And one more, this one from Peter Paul Rubens, early 1600s as well. We got the Hercules figure grasping the arc. I won't go into the esoteric. I believe this is an esoteric story. It's not literal, but I'm showing it because Hercules figures grasping arcs sometimes give rise to a story about a baby being grasped. And so now we finally start to get closer to the Iliad. Do you know the story of Achilles and why he's so invulnerable to weapons?
Yeah, he was dunked into what's the
Yeah, you're
name?
right. Yeah,
Into a river.
Yes, the famous river of the
Yeah.
dead, right? The river of the underworld. There's the rivers that flow through the underworld, and the most sacred of all those rivers is the river Styx. Styx, Styx, the river Styx. Now, in some versions of this story, he's dipped into the fire. So his mother, Thetis, Thetis, I should have put it on the screen for people to see, is immortal. Her husband is mortal. He's a great fighter. He's descended from Zeus, Peleus, but she wants her son to be immortal, Achilles. In fact, in some versions of the story, she has like 6 or 7 other children before Achilles, and she tries to make each one of them immortal by putting them in the fire, and they all burn up. And in one version, the husband comes home and snatches Achilles out of the fire just in time and says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm making our son immortal." But he is grasped by the heel, and that's why he has the Achilles heel, and we still have our Achilles heel today and the Achilles tendon, and that's where he's vulnerable. And in some versions, he's dipped into the river Styx. Well, it's all celestial. Which one was he dipped into? It's all celestial. It has to do with that region of the sky. This is a Danish painter depicted this, but can you see again, the mother in this case is in the outline of Hercules with the extended rear leg, one arm reaching forward. She's not carrying a big weapon over her back, but she's clearly grasping an arching baby. This Danish artist envisioned it there, dipping into the river Styx. And then here's a more sculpture one, but again, this is actually earlier. Thomas Banks. Actually, I guess they're contemporaries. I shouldn't say that. So Thomas Banks is an English sculptor. Again, Thetis dipping Achilles there. He's arching, clearly an arching baby, and she's in the posture of Hercules. So these constellations can play a male character or a female character, and we find this pattern around the world. There's an important story in the myths of Maui, where Maui is thrown into the sea foam at the edge of the sea, and Maui's grandfather rescues him and pulls him up out of the water. So again, a powerful kind of Hercules figure picking up a baby. And so now we're starting to get to Achilles. Anyway, I'll pause there just because that was a lot. I don't want this just to be me talking, but I wanted to kind of show the listeners what I mean when I say all the world's myths are based on the stars. Any
So what we see here would be another Hercules figure.
Right. So the story, what I would say is that the story itself, I don't think Achilles is necessarily associated with Hercules. He has characteristics more of other constellations that we can get into a little bit. But when he's a baby and he's dunked in the water right next to Hercules, so he's either dunked into water or fire in the 2 variations of the myths. Sometimes the river Styx, sometimes into a fire. And baby Maui, when he's pulled out of the fire, out of the water by his grandfather, he's hung up in the rafters over the fire to dry out and warm up in the story of baby Maui. So there's a fire involved. And that, remember, New Zealand or Aotearoa, in Hawaii and the Polynesian islands all across the vast Pacific are basically on the opposite side of the earth from ancient Greece. And yet the same pattern of a figure picking up a baby out of the water into the fire or above the fire. Why is Achilles dipped into either water or a fire? If that scene is associated with Hercules and Corona Borealis, is there a watery or river or a fiery feature next to them in the sky anywhere that you can think of? What might be, like, what could play the role of a river, a heavenly
Milky
river?
Way.
Yes, the Milky Way, which could also look like a column of smoke or cloudy fire, smoke coming up from a fire. And indeed, in various myths and in the Bible, the Milky Way will do that. So Achilles being dipped in the water by his mother, I wouldn't say he's a Hercules figure. I'd say that scene is probably associated with that part of the heavens where we have a baby being held and we have the Milky Way going right up next to it, nearby. Now, the Iliad doesn't really talk about Achilles being dunked in the Styx or in the fire or even being invulnerable, except in one place. It doesn't even say anything about that. The Iliad focuses really closely on one specific tragedy. It starts off with the Rage of Achilles because he's been insulted. Agamemnon, I would say the Greeks, it's not really the Greeks because this is before what we think of as ancient Greece. They always call them the Achaeans or the Argives, but just for kind of shorthand, we could say the Greek side versus the Trojan side. The Greeks have had a successful battle and they've captured a bunch of captives and a bunch of treasure. And some of the captives happen to be beautiful young women. And one of them is the daughter of the priest of Apollo. And the different gods are on the different sides in this conflict. And Apollo is on the side of the Trojans, as is his twin sister Artemis. They're both on the side of the Trojans. Athena is on the side of the Greeks or the Achaeans. Anyway, Agamemnon's got the daughter of the priest of Apollo, and he says, "This is my war captive." And Apollo's priest, his name is Chryses, prays to Apollo and says, "This is not right. Agamemnon should give my daughter back." And he goes and he tells Agamemnon, "Look, I'll give you all this ransom. Please give my daughter back. Don't make her your slave and take her back to, a foreign land." And Agamemnon says no. Agamemnon's just, he's always a little insecure in himself, as he's the king of the largest group, but he's not the best warrior. Achilles is. And so Agamemnon's always got a little bit of a complex going on. And he's like, "I will not give her back." And so the priest prays to Apollo and says, this is totally wrong. Agamemnon, refuses any ransom. Please strike the Greeks dead. And so Apollo starts going through the Greeks' camp, sending a terrible plague, and they're all dying. And finally, Achilles says, "This has got to stop." And he calls a big group together and he says, "Look, we got to get a priest on our side to figure out what's going on. Some god must be against us." And the Greek priest or Achaean priest Calchas says, "Okay, I've consulted the proper ways of consulting the invisible world, and it's because of the daughter of the priest of Apollo, and Apollo's pissed. And you got to give her back." And Agamemnon says, "I will not." And Achilles says, "Well, we're all dying." And Agamemnon says, "Okay." And Odysseus, "Take her back." So Odysseus takes her back. And Agamemnon says, "But now I feel like I've been disrespected. Achilles, I'm going to take your war captive, Briseis, another maiden that's been captured." And Achilles says, "Hey, capture your own, captive in the next battle." And Agamemnon says, "No, I'm the king of the biggest group. You give her over." And he does. And they take her. And so Achilles says, "Fine. You may be you may have the biggest army around you, but I'm the best fighter. I'm sitting it out now, and you'll see how bad it is without me. And so I will not fight. In fact, I'll go home. He later doesn't go home. Odysseus talks him out of it, I think. But that's the Iliad is all about that. Achilles is pouting. He will not fight. And his mother, Thetis, that we met a minute ago, who's a divine herself, goes up to Zeus and says, hey, would you please, I want some more honor for my son, because he's basically slated to die in the Trojan War. I know he's going to die. I was told that when he was little, that if he went off to war, he would have a name that would live forever. He would be the greatest warrior that anyone would ever speak of, but he would die in the war. Or he could live to a ripe old age and never have any glory. And that's really what I really wanted for him. And we can get into that a little bit later. But now that he has gone off to war, I want him to get some glory before he dies. Zeus, can you make sure that the Trojans win for a while to really make them see how much they need my son? It's like, oh my goodness. It's like Game of Thrones, right? So anyway, that's the whole thing. The whole story is about that argument. And then back and forth, the battles rage. And then finally at the end, Achilles is finally goaded into action. He finally comes back into action. And it's significant what causes him to come back into action. And then he's mad and he goes berserk and starts just dominating. And he finally, no spoilers for those who haven't read the Iliad, turn it off here, go read the Iliad and then come back. He finally kills Hector. That's it. That's basically the end of the Iliad. We don't get to the Trojan horse in the Iliad. And that was like the ruse of Odysseus, who came up. Odysseus, the great, clever, wise strategy, comes up with the Trojan horse. And that's all celestial as well. And we can talk about that too. But the whole thing is celestial. And I would argue it's esoteric. It's actually talking about things that we need in our own lives. I believe it has to do with trauma and blindness. Before we got on, we were talking about how frustrating it is that people just kind of sometimes refuse to see what's right in front of them. Why is that? It's because there's some kind of a struggle going on inside of us. The Trojan War is actually happening inside of each of us. We've got all these different parts of ourselves that are acting in different ways. I think that's what they're showing, kind of a psychological reading, but also it's an esoteric, talking about things on many, many levels. And that's what's going, like, why is Agamemnon, why does he have to be such a, why is he so insecure in himself? Everybody acknowledges he's got the biggest army. Why does he have to still be so insecure? And then Achilles, why does he have to act the way he does? And it's actually trying to show us things, I believe, that we wrestle with each and every day, every minute, like, things that we do. And then later we look back and say, why did I do that? Oh my God, what was I doing? Why was I such an idiot? Why did I do that? Why was it such a knuckleheaded move? Or why was I so harsh? Why did I say those things? Why did I let that person push my buttons like that? I think that's what's being illustrated in this myth. And we can see that it's esoteric because we can see that it's based on the stars.
So we already mentioned that in Greek mythology, Aquarius is associated with Troy. But do you know why that was?
I actually, I think Troy is near Aquarius. So I have my own interpretations of these things, but let's dive into it a little bit.
Fine.
But I think it's nearby, and that's why there's an association. So let me share my screen a little bit more and show, if I haven't shown enough to show that the myths are based on the stars, now I can show some that the Iliad is also based on the stars. So the Iliad itself is based on the stars. There's a special, this type of vase has a special name. It's associated with like olive oil. You would put olive oil in this kind of vase. You can see it has kind of and this painter has been given this name, the Diosphos painter, because he liked to, he appears to have painted almost, or she, could have been a she, I don't know. This painter painted this type of vase almost exclusively. And this scene is a scene from the Iliad by, we don't know who this painter was. The academics in the 1800s and 1900s started giving names to these different painters, and they called this painter the Diosphos, or I don't even know how to pronounce it. Diosphos painter was active around 490 BC. This is a scene of Achilles. You know what he's doing? This is Achilles right here, driving a chariot. He's driving a chariot. He's got kind of a big long crest on his head. And it's kind of a two-wheeled chariot. It's kind of a sports car of chariots there, like a little tiny Porsche chariot. He is dragging, I guess it'd be a Greek, I don't know, a Greek car chariot, but Greek sports car chariot. He's dragging the body of Hector.
Mm-hmm.
That's Hector dragging in the dust behind him. And then there's this figure behind Achilles kind of flying in the air with wings. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Right there. Does that outline look familiar at all from many of the constellations that we saw earlier, with a extended kind of a lunge and a rear leg with a heel raised?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that's again a Hercules figure. Instead of having a big giant club over his head, this time it's wings. But it's the same really distinctive outline, body outline and posture of the constellation Hercules. So this scene,
What is the significance of the wing?
Yeah. Well, so sometimes these, it's because Patroclus has died. So the thing that brings Achilles back to the fight is the Greeks. So Thetis goes to Zeus and says, I want my son to get more glory. He's sitting it out because of the insult of Agamemnon. So please make sure the Trojans win. Could you call off the other gods and goddesses that keep helping either side, and just let the humans fight it out? And I know that without Achilles, Hector will just dominate, because Achilles is the only one who can match Hector. And that's what happens, basically. Zeus nods his head and says, okay, you gods and goddesses, take a breather, let the humans battle it out a bit. And the Greeks get beaten all the way back to their ships. And the Greeks are like, Achilles, when are you going to just, get over it and come back and help us? We're going to get, our ships are going to get burned here, and all our kids are going to be orphans because of you. And Achilles says, no, not until Agamemnon apologizes. And Agamemnon eventually does, bring back Briseis and says, okay, we need you back. And Achilles is like, nope, I still want to make you pay. And then finally, though, Achilles says, I'll let Patroclus, my bosom buddy, my close companion, my favorite friend, my best friend, wear my armor. And maybe that'll help. And he can go out dressed in my armor, and all the Trojans will think that I'm back, and they'll panic. And that's exactly what happens.
It was his cousin.
He might be his cousin. I can't remember. But
okay.
but modern scholarship, almost universally since, in the 20th century, kind of since Freud and kind of the new interpretation says, oh, it was his homosexual lover. They were lovers. That's what it's all about. Of course, they were not just, they were bisexual, because of course he wanted Briseis too, but I don't think it's that at all. I think they are actually a pattern of twins that is found throughout myths of the world. All around the world we have twins. We briefly mentioned Leda, who has the twins Castor and Polydeuces, or Pollux as the Romans called Polydeuces. One is divine, one is mortal. Castor is mortal. Polydeuces, or Pollux, is divine. Heracles, or the Romans called him Hercules, actually, he's the divine son of Zeus. So he's half divine. He has a divine father and a mortal mother, but he also has a twin. Not too many people know about the twin of Heracles. His twin is called Iphicles, I-P-H-I, Iphicles. So a lot of times when Zeus, like when he goes and sleeps with Leda, Leda is the wife of the king of Sparta, King Tyndareus. Zeus arranges that the king, the mortal king, will come and sleep with her later that night so that when she gets pregnant, he won't be suspicious of Zeus because, well, he said, no, that makes sense. Okay. So what happens in the myth is that one son is the son of Zeus. The one twin is the son of Zeus. One twin is the son of the mortal king, Tyndareus. So we have a divine twin and a mortal twin. So the Achilles Patroclus twinning, I interpret this, and I talk about that in that book that I showed, Star Myths of the World, Volume 2. I believe it is again, we kind of have the higher twin and the lower twin. So Patroclus is almost like a twin of Achilles. They are illustrating one person. This is not two people. That's why Achilles loves Patroclus, because we ourselves have a split personality. We have an egoic mind and a higher self. We actually have multiple parts, but we have this divine self, or this indestructible self, that kind of cutting edge modern psychologists talk about this. I'm referring to, and probably mentioned before on some of the previous visits, Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, who talks about alienation from the self being the heart of all addiction, and being the heart of many actual physical problems that we have, and being the heart of our self-sabotage of things that we do, is alienation from the self that happens due to trauma. And then Dr. Richard Schwartz, he and Dr. Gabor Mate are, they converse, and they're compatible analysis of what's going on inside of people that get alienated from their self and have they bury the higher self. We bury a part of ourselves due to trauma, or we suppress. So that is what I believe is going on in this myth. So Patroclus tries to do what the higher self can do. He tries to put on the armor of Achilles, and he's successful for a while. He kills a lot of Trojan warriors, but he's not Achilles. And he's just wearing Achilles' armor. And finally, Hector says, oh, that looks like Achilles out there, seeing the armor. And he starts steering a beeline. He's like, just what I wanted. I want to go head to head with Achilles. I need to get this thing over with once and for all. Whether I die or he dies, I don't care. And he kills Patroclus. And he strips off the armor of Patroclus. And then Hector puts on the armor of of Achilles. So this is really interesting. And now Patroclus is dead, and Hector has taken the armor of Achilles that Patroclus was wearing and put it on. And the messengers go back to Achilles in his tent, and they say, Achilles, we've got some bad news. Patroclus did great. He was wearing your armor. He did great. He slew a lot of Trojans, but he came up against Hector, and nobody can beat Hector. And Hector killed him. And Hector took your armor too, by the way. And Achilles goes berserk. He weeps. He mourns. He is grieving for the death of Patroclus. This is why the modern scholars say, oh, they were homosexual lovers. He says, I love Patroclus more than I love myself. This is a picture of actually us. We have a split personality, but now Achilles has no armor. Hector's wearing his armor. So Achilles is like, all right, I'm ready to go. I will now kill Hector. But I need some armor. So Thetis again goes to the gods and says, Achilles needs some new armor. Hector took his armor, and Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, whose name in Latin is Vulcan, makes glorious new armor for Achilles. It's so bright that no one can even look at it, which reminds me of the sun. This all has to do with the heavenly cycles. But Achilles puts on that armor and goes out and meets Hector, and Achilles is mad. He's infuriated because Hector has killed Patroclus. And so when Achilles and Hector, when he sees Achilles coming in this armor, he can't take it. He stands his ground. He's like, I'm ready for you. And then he finally turns and runs. He's like, I can't, that guy in that armor, I'm scared. And he runs. It's like the divine armor. And Achilles runs him down, and then Hector turns and fights finally, and Achilles kills him. And then Achilles is still so mad, he drags Hector around, disgraces his body, drags him in the dust, and he won't give the body back for 12 days. And then finally King Priam, the father of Hector himself, comes to Achilles with gifts and says, please give me back my son's body so I can bury him. Please honor an old man. I know that my city's bound to fall now that Hector is dead. He was the one man who could have kept you off and protected us from the Greeks, and now he's dead. Please just let me have the body back. It brings tears to your eyes. And Achilles says, you're right. Go ahead. In fact, I'm going to tell the Greeks, we'll give you 12 days to bury your son. We won't even fight. We'll just sit out here. And the war would have been over then. But then there's the goddesses who hate Troy so much, Hera in particular, because of the incident of Paris that we'll talk about in a sec. She can't stand that they're not fighting. She wants Troy to burn. So that's basically where the Iliad ends, with Hector body being given back to Priam, his father, by Achilles. That's the end. But then later, Hera is so angry at Paris for not awarding her the win in the beauty contest, the judgment of Paris, that she wants the city to burn. So she eggs on the Greeks again, and the whole thing goes back into battle. She basically breaks the truce, or tricks the truce into being broken, and they're back into battle again. And eventually, of course, Troy falls, and that's it.
Mm. So Achilles, where can we see him?
Oh, yeah. Judith is like, can you please give me some Aquarius here? I think Achilles is related to Aquarius, okay? But not in this scene, So I did a little close up. This scene is actually the scene that we've already seen with Hercules up top there, and over a figure called Ophiuchus. And there's the northern crown that we saw. But right in front of the northern crown, there's another figure right here. That's the figure called Boötes. Can you see where I've put the Boötes is a charioteer kind of a figure. And we know that this chariot is nearby to Hercules because there's Patroclus in the outline of Hercules. The ancient artist has put a Patroclus figure right behind the charioteer figure. So I think in this particular scene, charioteers are often associated with Boötes. Right above Boötes is the Big Dipper. That's just the handle of the Big Dipper, very, very top there. The Big Dipper can be envisioned as a team of horses pulling a chariot. And it's even described as Charles's wagon by the English in older English. They called it Charles's wain or Charles's wagon. It's like a team of horses pulling a chariot. Boötes is like a charioteer. Ophiuchus could also play the role of a chariot. In some myths it does. And right below Ophiuchus is Scorpio, and that I think is Hector getting his hair dragged in the dust. And the dust that's rising up is the Milky Way. It's a little hard to hopefully everyone can see that this scene of a charioteer with a winged figure in that posture behind it is related to this part of the sky. But just to show you a little bit more, this is from the Bhagavad Gita. We have almost the exact same scene going on. This is, once again, the greatest warrior on the side of, there's two sides. In this case, it's the Battle of Kurukshetra. We've got the Pandavas on one side and the Kauravas on the other side of this great battle that's in the Mahabharata. But again, the greatest warrior who has the strongest weapons, Arjun. Here's all the labels. Arjun wants to sit it out. He says, you know what? I'm going to sit out the battle. And Krishna says, hold on, Arjun, let me talk to you. And that's where the Bhagavad Gita comes from. Not to get off on too much of a tangent, but this is the same part of the sky. The war cart in this case is associated with Ophiuchus. You can see how the war carts in the Mahabharata, they have that kind of canopy on the top, just like Ophiuchus kind of has a little canopy shape on top. And in this case, on top of the war cart, there's a special banner with the god Hanuman is actually above the war cart of Arjun and Krishna. And Hanuman, again, is associated with the constellation Hercules. You see how you could have a kind of a monkey tail. Hercules plays a role of Hanuman. I talk about this in the Ancient Worldwide System, that book, 2019. But again, we've got a chariot figure in the same part of the sky. I didn't draw in Boötes, but it's right in front of Ophiuchus. But Arjun, in this case, I believe is associated with Sagittarius. Arjun has a great bow, Sagittarius right there. You can see even Arjun in the posture in the picture is putting his hands together. Sagittarius figures are sometimes envisioned as putting their hands together like that in that mudra. It's called the Anjali mudra, like the praying hands. Sagittarius is a figure that's associated with that exact posture in other artwork too, ancient artwork. So I'm just showing that this chariot scene in that particular vase shows Achilles driving the chariot kind of in the shape of Boötes, but really mostly I think that Achilles is associated with a different constellation, Aquarius, we'll get into in a second. But just sticking with the Indian myths for a second, Krishna, not only is the chariot associated with Ophiuchus, but Krishna is associated with Ophiuchus. This is just a photograph, but there's many, many statues of Krishna playing the flute. Can you see how the figure, they're reenacting a certain scene where Krishna dances on the heads of this multi-headed serpent called the Kaliya Nag, who lives in this river. The Kaliya Nag lives in a river, and Krishna in this story dances on his head, on the heads of the Kaliya Nag, and assumes the weight of the entire universe. And the Kaliya Nag says, "Stop, I can't take it anymore. Please let me go, Krishna." And they reenact this every year in a certain river in India. And they have a young man from the town play the role of Krishna, and he jumps into the river. And then the older men bring the many-headed serpent, and then he dances on it and plays the flute. Can you see the flute right here on Ophiuchus? Mm-hmm. They're kind of held out to one side, and he's dancing on the heads. Who's Ophiuchus dancing on the heads of? Well, a multi-headed serpent. That's Scorpio. That's the constellation Scorpio, is right below Ophiuchus. So maybe I'm kind of maybe rushing and bouncing around a lot, but I'm trying to show that there are many, many parallels. When I say that this scene in the Iliad or this figure in the Iliad is associated with this grouping of stars, we can see it playing out over and over in other myths around the world too. Oh, here's one more myth. I don't know if you recognize this myth. This is a myth from the Norse myths where someone's being dressed up for a wedding, but it's the story. This is a picture from 1893. This is a story of Thor and Loki going to a wedding. Do you know this story? So I grew up with this book by, it's called Norse Gods and Giants by Ingrid and Edgar Perrin Dolaire. I think that's how they might pronounce their last name, 1967. But in this story, Loki, Thor, he wakes up one morning, he reaches for his hammer, and his hammer is not there. And he says, "Uh-oh, where's my hammer? I've lost my hammer." And he goes to Loki and he says, "Loki, I don't know where my hammer is." And Loki, who is always, mischievous and wanting to cause chaos, for once, Loki is really scared. He says, "Wait a minute, you don't know where your hammer is? That's a big problem. And we can't let this news get out." So Loki goes to Freya, the goddess of beauty and love, and says, "Freya, loan me your falcon wings so that I can put on your wings and fly around and see if I can spot Thor's hammer. Thor's hammer is missing." And Freya says, "Oh, Thor's hammer is missing? Take the wings, go wherever you need to go and find it." So Loki puts on the wings and flies around, and he spots a Jotun, a frost giant in Jotunheim named Thrym. This is recorded in an old the prose Edda, the poetic Edda. The poetic Edda is the older Edda. The poetic, it's called the Thrymskvida. It's the story of Thrym. So this Jotun, this frost giant's name is Thrym, and he's stolen Thor's hammer. And he and Loki get to talking, and Thrym eventually admits, yeah, I stole Thor's hammer and I buried it 8 miles underground and you'll never find it. And Loki says, okay, what do you want for the hammer? And Thrym says, I've got everything I need. I've got cattle, I've got wealth, I've got land. I just want Freya. That's the only thing I don't have that I really, really want, the beautiful goddess of beauty, Freya herself. And Loki says, okay, I'll be right back. And he flies back to Freya and he says, okay, good news. I found the hammer. You need to go marry Thrym and we'll get it back. And Freya says, are you crazy, Loki? I'm not going to marry a Jotun. Get right out of town. And so now all the gods have, gathered around. They said, what's going on? And Loki says, Thor's hammer's been stolen. I found it. A Jotun buried it underground, won't tell us where it is, and he wants to marry Freya. And the other gods say, well, what are we going to do? And Freya says, well, I'm not marrying that Jotun. And finally, Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, who's actually kind of like Loki's rival, says, I know, dress Thor up as Freya and put on her, her beautiful necklace and send him, and the Jotun will never know the difference. And then he'll get the hammer back, and then we'll all be good. And so that's what they do. They dress Thor up as a bride, give him Thor's neck, and Loki just gets into it. He says, oh, perfect. I'll be the bridesmaid. And Loki's always,
I was.
Have you heard this one?
It has a little bit of a transgender.
Yeah, it's actually in the Greek myths too. It's in the Achilles story. In fact, it's in there's the Mahabharata that I just mentioned from ancient India. This is very common in the ancient myths as well. So you see Loki driving Thor in his chariot with the billy goats. Which constellation do you think Thor is associated with?
I have no idea.
Well, he's the most powerful god, and he wields a thunder weapon, just like Zeus.
Hercules.
Yeah, so he's Hercules again. So this is yet another. I went through this long tangent to show there's the necklace of Freya that is one time Loki steals the necklace of Freya. But anyway, there's Thor and Hercules. There's Loki driving the chariot. Whoop, I went too far. But anyway, I'm just showing that around the world, this pattern, Thor, the chariot is associated with that part of the sky. Now, this is the Judgment of Paris. This is one depiction of the Judgment of Paris. This is from the late 1700s. It's not necessarily my favorite one, but this is how I've got a couple others. This is how the whole Trojan War got started. Paris was this youth of great beauty, great physical attraction, and all these goddesses said, oh, he is so handsome and so good to look at. I bet you he's a great judge of beauty. So Hera, the wife of Zeus, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, go down to Paris and they say, hey, young man, you're so beautiful. Could you please settle a little disagreement we have of which one of us is the most beautiful? Like,
big mistake.
No win situation for Paris, right?
Big mistake.
And whoever you choose, give this golden apple to. And so he's like, how should I choose? And Hera says, hey, Paris, if you choose me, I'll give you a great kingdom and power, and you'll just be a powerful king, and it'll be great. You'll be everyone will respect you. And Athena says, Paris, don't listen to her. Choose me, and I'll make you wise and give you skill, all these different things. And Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, says, Paris, you should pick me. And if you pick me, I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world to be your wife. And so Paris says, how to choose. This is actually a pattern that we find in myth around the world also, right? There's King Midas, who's Dionysus, the god Dionysus said, Midas, what do you want? And Midas famously said, I want everything to turn to gold that I touch. Another disastrous choice. Solomon was actually asked, we saw the Judgment of Solomon. He was asked, what do you want? And Solomon said, I want wisdom to help judge the people. And that scene is right before the scene with the two babies. And by the way, for listeners who aren't familiar with the story, no baby gets cut in half. The mother yells out, "Don't cut the baby in half. Just give it to the other one. I don't care." And the other one says, no, cut it in half. And then Solomon says, okay, stop. Don't cut the baby in half. Obviously, it belongs to that mother, the one who said stop. So this pattern of what do you ask for from the divine realm? Solomon asked for wisdom. Midas asked for gold. Even though he's already wealthy king, it's like an addiction. He couldn't get enough. And Paris chooses also disastrous. He says, Aphrodite. So in this picture, he's given the apple to Aphrodite. I chose this picture because you can see up in the top, there's a chariot kind of a figure right above Paris, where it's like a female charioteer, but that's also kind of in the outline of Hercules again. Or I would argue that kind of billowing thing over her back is a little bit like the weapon. Sometimes you'll see the god of the Bible with that kind of billowing thing over his back, and he's also associated with the constellation Hercules. But this is how the Trojan War got started. So Paris, all these are celestial in the outlines. These are the figures are celestial in their outlines, even the way that these later artists, centuries later, are depicting them. That's the judgment of Paris. So I'll tell you who Hector is, and then I'll tell you who Hercules is, and I'll show you where Troy is and why it's associated with Aquarius. This is an ancient vase showing Hector. He knows he's going to his death. He goes and visits his wife one more time. He says, and he and his wife obviously love each other very much. You can see it in the Iliad. They always, she understands the situation that he's in, that he's going to die because of Paris's stupid choice. And this is a scene where it's a touching scene. Their son is on her lap, on the lap of his wife's name is Andromache. This is from around 370, 360 BC. There's Hector. There's Andromache. Their son Astyanax is on her lap, and he's scared by the helmet. Hector comes in wearing his helmet. He says, Andromache, I have to go. I think it's time. This time I'm probably going to meet up with Achilles, and even though I'm a great fighter, I'm pretty sure that Achilles will kill me. And this is the last time I'll probably ever see you and our son. And he's wearing his helmet, and the son panics because of the helmet. And so he takes his helmet off and shows it to his son. And it's like the tender moment where he says goodbye to his family, and that's it. He never sees him again because he goes off to war. And that's when Achilles kills him. He goes off, that's when he defeats Patroclus, takes his armor, and then Achilles kills Hector wearing Achilles' own armor. But this figure of Hector is associated with a specific constellation. Andromache is obviously in the outline of another specific constellation. You can see it in. I'm rushing a little because I'm trying to get to Aquarius and Achilles, but Ophiuchus is a warrior who often has a crested helmet and uses a spear. I would argue that Hector is associated with Ophiuchus. And in this scene, Andromache, the ancient artist has depicted Andromache in the outline of Virgo. You can see Virgo a little bit over there to the side on the lower right part of your screen. Virgo figures often seated in that kind of posture like that. And there's a distinctive outstretched arm on the constellation Virgo. And that star at the end of the outstretched arm is often associated with a child in the lap of the mother. In this case, Astyanax. In the case of Isis and Horus, there's lots of ancient depictions of Isis with her child Horus there associated with that star. And I've done some videos where I also argue that this is the same pattern as the Christ child on the lap of the Virgin Mary is associated with Virgo there. You can see the parallels here across the different ancient myths and ancient cultures. So Hector, I just want to show that Hector is associated with Ophiuchus before I move to Achilles and Aquarius and Troy. And we'll finish up or talk about whatever you want. But these are a couple of textual passages where we see Hector using not just one spear, but sometimes two spears. This is from this translation here, which I really love, by the late Professor Robert Fagles. Great, just tremendous translator. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet him in person. We were teaching. Got to be an instructor in the Department of English at West Point, the military academy, and we taught the Iliad and the Odyssey in alternating years. So we were teaching the Odyssey when he came and visited, and spent some time with us. It was really wonderful. But this translation by Robert Fagles from the 1990s, says, "Down he leapt," this is talking about Hector, "from his chariot, fully armed, brandishing 2 spears, went striding down his lines, ranging flank to flank, driving his fighters into battle." And then 2 spears is what I was pointing out with that quotation. Another time, his spear has a golden hoop on the end of it. "Now Hector, dear to Zeus," this is in book 6, "strode through the gates, clutching a thrusting lance." So he's often described as the defender of the gates. A thrusting lance, 11 forearms long. So that's a pretty long spear. Figures associated with a long spear are almost always associated with Ophiuchus. Goliath has a spear that's described as being like a weaver's beam. He's associated with Ophiuchus. The bronze tip of the weapon shone before him, ringed with a golden hoop to grip the shaft. This is another clue that we're talking about Ophiuchus. This is the constellation Ophiuchus. Why is Ophiuchus often carrying spears? Well, you can envision these squiggly lines on either side of Ophiuchus. That's the serpent. Ophiuchus means the serpent holder. So it looks like Ophiuchus is a central body holding serpents on either side, but those 2 serpents on either side can take the form of different things in different myths. Sometimes they become vines of a grapevine. Sometimes they are envisioned as a spear or 2 spears. So a figure is associated with Ophiuchus, a figure who is associated with Ophiuchus will often have a spear or sometimes even 2 spears, as we see with Hector. And sometimes, not just in this case, but in some other cases too, a spear will be described as having a hoop in order to hold it more easily. And I think that's because one of the serpent halves has this, it's called the serpent head, but that is like the hoop of the spear of Hector. Let me just move this over a little bit. You can see, still showing my screen there, but the Archangel Michael, he is often depicted as using a spear to spear the dragon in Revelation 12. And he's always described as standing on top of that dragon, or he's always depicted standing on top of the dragon. You can see, the spear going right down into Scorpio from Ophiuchus. You see how that works? Mm-hmm. So Hector is associated with Ophiuchus. And interestingly enough, Ophiuchus and Aquarius are almost mirror images of each other. They're almost figures who are associated with Aquarius will often have associations with Ophiuchus also. Jesus is an Ophiuchus figure. And the outline of Ophiuchus, if I just go back, the outline of Ophiuchus, you can see the cross in it right there. If you look closely, you can see why the cross of Jesus looks like Ophiuchus. In between 2 thieves, by the way, crucified in between 2 others, right? So Jesus is an Ophiuchus figure, but sometimes Jesus is also associated with Aquarius. He turns water into wine. He separates the sheep from the goats, and Aquarius is in between Aries, the ram, and Capricorn, the goat. So it's an interesting dynamic between Ophiuchus and Aquarius. And Aquarius, which we'll meet in just one second, is a swift runner, and we'll see why. This is an ancient Greek vase that actually shows Ilion. It actually says in Greek letters above that kind of castle-looking thing in the center. This is like a mold that they would use to make pottery out of. It says above it that there's a letter I for Ilion. Then there's a kind of looks like an upside down V. That's their letter L, another I, an O, and an N. So that says Ilion. It's got this square shaped city Off to the left, you can see a horse. That's probably the Trojan horse, you know, that at the fall of Troy. You see the horse there on the left of the square. Can you see it? And then there's a figure with kind of a spear shape on the right.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the part of the sky. Now we finally get Aquarius. Ophiuchus and Hercules are off to the right. If you've seen them enough now, everyone can maybe recognize them. But where, oh, where could the city of Ilion be, the city of Troy? And I spent a lot of time in that book that I showed giving some arguments why the Great Square, it's called the Great Square of Pegasus. I just outlined it and put a label on it there. Can you see the Great Square?
Yeah.
That is the city of Troy.
Okay.
And as it goes across the sky, it will eventually sink down into the horizon in the west. Everything is moving from left to right on the screen here because this picture, we're facing south. Things are rising in the east on the left and they're sinking down in the west on the right. And that's why Troy finally falls. It's a lot of cities or sometimes vineyards are associated with this great square. And right next to the great square, we have the horse of Pegasus. You see Pegasus right there?
Yeah.
That's like the Trojan horse that finally gets inside. They put it outside the walls of the city. And I think Helen says, don't bring that horse in here. That might be a trap. That's where we get the phrase, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. You know, watch out for that horse, she says. She doesn't trust it. She thinks it's a trick. Anyway, are you clapping because I made a great point?
No, I had, there is a little insect flying.
I thought you were
around my
clapping
head.
for a great
It's
point.
driving me nuts.
I'll take it as a great point. And then also on the other side of the great square is Andromeda, beautiful constellation of Andromeda. I think Helen of Troy is probably associated with Andromeda. She's always seen walking along the walls of Troy, you know, forlorn, wishing she were back, you know, with her husband. Menelaus is a great warrior king of the Greek side. She's actually kind of not crazy about Paris because, you know, she's actually supposed to be married to Menelaus. That's the whole problem is when Paris asked for the most beautiful woman in the world to be his wife, Aphrodite goes and gets Helen, but she's also semi-divine. She's actually a daughter of Leda, come to think of it. The same story of Leda and the Swan. I'm pretty sure that Helen is her daughter. Anyway, she's already married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Remember, Leda was a queen of Sparta, so this is the next generation. Menelaus, the red-haired king of Sparta, happily married, and she gets taken off by Aphrodite in Paris. And Aphrodite helps Paris abduct her. So she's always there on the walls of Troy, forlornly waiting for the Greeks. But there's Aquarius. I should have outlined it, but let me just show it to you. Let me just zoom like 400 and kind of maximize this. So this is Aquarius right here. And Aquarius is right next to Troy right here. This is where I think Troy is. Aquarius is often described as a headlong runner, a swift runner. Can you see why Aquarius would be described as a swift runner with this outline?
Yeah.
I mean, it's let me make it even bigger. He's got like a pitched forward kind of a look, and he's running. And Achilles is always described as this swift runner. Now, what type of weapon they use kind of can also help you. Like I was showing you how Ophiuchus figures will almost always have spears. This is Ophiuchus. Where they actually get wounded will also, this is something I've written about in that book that I talk about. Where they get wounded, in the Iliad, a lot of warriors get wounded or killed. Where they get wounded can also help you figure out which constellation. Like we saw Boötes. Boötes has this kind of like pipe feature in front of his mouth, right? No, darn it, I just moved it so you can't see it. But you see how this pipe is coming out of the mouth of Boötes? I should have Let me see where I can find Boötes. I know where I find Boötes. Let me just go to the sky itself. So here's this constellation Planetarium Stellarium. This used to be shown as a square. It's open source, so people can change it. This is the great square of Pegasus right here. They turned it into a triangle to make it look more like the wings of Pegasus. I prefer the square, but anyway, here's Boötes. You see this pipe feature in his mouth. Move the time back. He's sinking below the horizon. So remember how I said Boötes is often a charioteer? And we saw many cases where, in the case of Loki and Thor, here's Thor in the chariot. Loki is up here pulling the chariot. Remember how we talked about that? So charioteer figures are associated with Boötes. And in the Iliad, whenever a charioteer is mentioned, if he gets killed, he'll almost always get killed by being stabbed. Where? Where do you think a Boötes figure would get stabbed? Just looking at this. In the face. You see how he's got a pipe?
Yeah.
You could envision this pipe, instead of being a pipe, as being a spear, a sword, a dagger going into his jaw or his face. You see that? I mean, it's graphic and violent. The Iliad, whenever a charioteer rolls up in his chariot and gets out of the chariot, is just like a kind of a, a minor figure, and he's going to die. You can already say, oh, I bet you he'll get stabbed in the face. And a few lines later, the Iliad will say, and the spear went into his jaw, and it cut right through his tongue, and it went out the back of his head, carrying his teeth with it. Like, really graphic. Because he's associated with that constellation. Ophiuchus figures are often wounded in the shoulder right here, because there's a line. You can envision the line of the constellation going into. Do you see what I'm getting at? So where do you think an Aquarius figure will get stabbed? Look at this line right here. A neck would be a good choice.
Yeah.
But actually, Aquarius figures always get stabbed in the gut because of this right here, this leg. This forward leg, it's very straight, is going right into the gut or the lower back. It could be envisioned as it came in the lower back and went out the front. And that will happen over and over in the Iliad. If it's a swift runner, it'll get stabbed in, that figure will get killed in the gut or the bowels. They'll say his bowels, the spear went in and pierced his intestines and they all spilled out. And that's exactly what happens to Patroclus, the twin of Achilles, the Achilles's, lower self, who Patroclus tries to do the job of Achilles, wearing the armor of Achilles. But unless we get in touch with our true self, we will not live up to our full potential. This is, some of the esoteric, but Achilles is also associated with Aquarius. And Aquarius figures are usually headstrong, quick, kind of rash in their judgment, swift runners. All those characteristics are associated with Aquarius. And it's all part of this. It's an ancient system that's going on. It's like all these figures in the zodiac and the Milky Way that go up the Milky Way. This is the river Styx. This is the Milky Way that baby Achilles was dunked in. And this is the fire that arises from the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 9. These parts of the heavens are part of a tremendous cycle that are used like a language or a code to convey, to talk about these profound truths about recovering connection with yourself. Or I believe that's one of their central messages that they're talking about.
Why make it so complicated?
This is a great question.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
Yeah, it's
that
a great
is
question.
not the first thought that you have when you
Yeah,
hear about Troy for the first time,
yeah,
that you're sitting there, especially not as a child, probably, that
right,
you're sitting there thinking, oh, yeah, that's a story about the stars.
right. It's a great question. And somebody once defined the esoteric. I wish I could find this reference again. Somebody said that Aristotle's definition of the esoteric, I think I'm remembering this right, I haven't been able to find the reference again, is something you learn before you understand.
Yeah.
Or later, you learn it, then you understand it. And I use the metaphor of the Karate Kid as a perfect example of this, where Mr. Miyagi teaches Daniel in the movie, remember, to wax on, wax off. He's learning, then he understands it. And the reason is because our mind will choke on it or reject it. Or, before before we got on, we were talking about, you were saying, I'm so frustrated with these people who won't see. And I said, but have compassion, because we refuse to see, that's a characteristic that we have. And there's a way to actually induce people to not see. Or there's methods, there's karate or kung fu, that the bad kung fu people who want to use it to oppress people will use the same moves over and over to traumatize and to make it so hard to see that you don't even know you've been divided, that you've suppressed yourself. So if you
Yeah,
listen to these,
but on the other hand, there's
yeah,
also this attitude, yeah, before I think that my government is doing something awful to me, I prefer being afraid of a virus. I can't be afraid of my government. My government would never do that to me.
so this is the perfect example that you're bringing up, Judith. So I'm not a psychologist, but I'm more recently more fascinated than ever. We had to take a year of psychology at West Point as part of the curriculum. And 19, 20 years old, I was like, I don't need this. This is, I kind of poo-pooed it or made fun of it in my
Yeah.
mind. Now I'm like, oh man, it's all about this. But the psychologists that I mentioned, like Gabor Mate, Dr. Richard Schwartz, Peter Levine, that talk about trauma, these cutting edge healers say what happens to a child is, it's a very powerful example. I think this was from Richard Schwartz. It might be Gabor Mate. I forget who gave this example, but if a child has a parent, you're 2 years old, you're 1.5 years old, you barely understand, you're still learning the language. But if your father or your mother is a complete loose cannon, sometimes loving, but occasionally terrifying, violent, or just in some way chaotic. So the child has a attachment instinct so strong because they have to. They cannot survive. A 1.5-year-old can't say, this, forget this family, I'm leaving, I'm out of here. Maybe when they're 18, but not when they're 1.5. So psychologically, what they will do, because which is more psychologically frightening. My father is unhinged. I live in a world of such chaos that my father could destroy me at any moment, and I never know when that could be. And he is broken. There's something broken in that guy. The child, that is horrifying. It's so horrifying to the child that it will instead say, there's something wrong with me, not that parent, because I must attach to that parent. If I do better, I've done something to make him mad. I've done something to make her say that, to make my parents fight, or whatever's going on. The child will blame it on themselves and will start to try and suppress. Oh, if I can just suppress it, and they'll suppress themselves. And the mechanism is so strong, they won't even know that it's happened. We don't even know that we've done this, and we've suppressed parts of ourselves, or even our true self. Dr. Richard Schwartz talks about, and Dr. Gabor Mate talks about, I've dealt with thousands of patients. If they have addiction, it is invariably because of trauma and separation from the self. And Dr. Richard Schwartz says, I've dealt with thousands of patients, and even if they've had the most horrendous trauma, there is a place, a self that is indestructible, that is amazingly resilient, but has been suppressed by these other parts as a defense mechanism. Those parts think that they're getting you through life. And if that self shows up, they're horrified because they're like, get that self out of here. Because they remember being 1.5 or 6 months or whatever. And when that courageous part of who they are, that the self is courageous, the self is compassionate, and they had to suppress those things because of the chaos they were in, the trauma. So then you brought up, people are they'd rather think that this whole virus situation is just a random thing than what's the more horrifying alternative? There's criminals have taken charge of my government is completely broken, and mafias have taken over it, and they're lying to my face. And those towers in New York City came down, and they told me it was because of this, and it wasn't because of that. It was because of something completely different. To accept that is extremely dislocating. It's like the whole ground underneath your feet just fell away. When you see the extent of some people call it being black pilled, where it's like there's the red pill and the blue pill in the Matrix. And then some people say there's a pill that's even darker than that will cause you to just like go crazy, because you're realizing the horrific nature, like the complete depravity of some of the, like, would somebody engineer a bioweapon on purpose? Well, yeah.
Well, what do we have all the labs for?
They did it in World War II, and then they brought those experts, over from Japan. There was a specific unit in Japan that was experimenting on the Chinese people with bio warfare, horrendous things. And the United States brought those scientists over and all the records. And this is not disputable. You can find books about it. But people's minds recoil in horror to think, well, okay, maybe they did that in 1945 because they didn't know what was going to happen next. There's no way they're still pursuing that. There's no way they would have brought down those towers on purpose, whoever these criminals are, or think of anything. Anyway, it's so horrific that the mind reels. That's called trauma. When you suppress what you actually know, looking at the way those towers came down, they did not come down because airplanes hit them, especially the third one, Building 7, that no airplane hit. And it comes down at free fall speed, or a speed indistinguishable from free fall. So your gut, your self, your higher self already knows, looking at that. And there's a part of you that is suppressing. Like, people can watch Building 7 come down 1 million times and go about their business thinking it came down because and just take the government story of the fires brought it down. Fires did not bring that building down. Something brought it down, but it wasn't a bunch of paper in file cabinets catching on fire and causing a building to come down, steel building, 47 stories, free fall speed. So that's exactly what trauma is. And so Patroclus and Achilles is just one example of this pattern. I believe that the ancient myths, they're operating on many, many, many levels, profound levels, but they are, at least one of their levels, and it's a central level, is designed to heal trauma, to show us you've actually been split from yourself, but there's a way to recover it. But you don't even know you've been split from yourself. So when someone says higher self, there's like a defense mechanism in your mind that goes, who is this new age person talking about higher self? I don't believe that crap. Right? It's like a defense mechanism, because there's a part of you that is afraid of your higher self coming out, because it's been steering the ship, and it's like, oh, I don't want to give the reins to the higher self. That's what the Bhagavad Gita is about. When Arjun gives the reins to Krishna, Krishna is the higher self, Arjun is the lower self. Achilles is the higher self, Patroclus is the lower self. The myths are about healing that schism, but they can also be used by people who want to inflict trauma. I mean, I think there's people who know this. It's like a psychologist. Think about a psychologist who knows the depths of the human brain, but decides to use it to mess people up even worse instead of trying to heal them. That's going on. People are using trauma on purpose, like actually using
like we do
trauma on
with
purpose.
any type of what you could call MK Ultra
That's right.
trauma. Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
So it's like that.
What I
That's
was
why. So that maybe is a great question. Did that answer your question though? Why they would put it in the? I believe they put it in that because you learn it first. It's like Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel-san, and then because otherwise, if I tried to just tell you, "Hi, you have a higher self that you've suppressed." It's like if Mr. Miyagi came up and said, "Daniel, here's how you can stop that kick from Johnny. If you hold your arm at this exact angle," Daniel's mind would be like, "Will that really work? I doubt that will work. What if he doesn't kick? What if he punches?" All the doubting parts, the mind will choke on it. But if you teach it through the esoteric method, it gets like down to the gut and the heart. It bypasses the brain, goes, "Oh, a nice little story. The defensive parts can take a break and say, "Okay, let's check out this story." And the message can come in and you can absorb it. And maybe it can wake you up. I think they're designed to wake people up to the fact of trauma and reconnect with yourself. So I think it was a great question.
Yeah, but I think most people don't get it anyway. And yeah, with movies and everything that we have, people think that might be just a myth. And myth to most people has this ring of didn't
Yes.
exist, it's not
Yes.
real.
Yes.
And
That's right.
but I find it actually sad that it is so seldom that people really grasp what is being taught. And I just had a thought. I have a couple of videos like Know Thyself and
Yes.
emotional illiteracy and subjects like that, because I think it is high time that we clean up our act. And the best way to start is to start with ourselves, yeah, instead of always pointing what is wrong with all the other ones. Not that you cannot notice it, but I would say the better way is starting with ourselves. And that is not very popular, even today. Yeah, because I guess people have this image in their head. If they admit that they should work on their self, then that is like saying, yeah, something is wrong with me. Yeah, but it's not about wrong or right. It's not being detached from yourself. Because the more you are detached from yourself, the more they can kick you around like a football.
That's right. It's so beautifully said, Judith. I was applauding everything you said. The know thyself. They can kick you around like a football is a great metaphor. I say they can move you like a puppet because they can push your buttons. The self, the higher self, that when Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Richard Schwartz talk about self, the other parts, we all have these different parts, is what Richard Schwartz talks about. They're like a defense mechanism, and they can be kind of triggered, like my dog, when the mail, the postal delivery comes up and my dog would just without thinking, rah, 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 rah. Well, we have these, kind of codes, old algorithms in our head, maybe from when we were 1 year old of when we get triggered, people who know how to push those buttons can then move us around like a marionette. Unless when we recover self, when we get, and it's a lot of work, and it's not like, oh, I'm in touch with myself now for the rest of my life. Self will be in charge, and those parts will just always look to the self as the leader. But the more that we can so we've been alienated from self.
Yeah.
And the Know Thyself, I'm glad that you've made a video called Know Thyself. Obviously, that is an ancient, the ancient temple at Delphi said, Know Thyself. Well, what was the temple at Delphi? Is where you went to hear the voice of the gods. And what did it say? Know Thyself. I know that we've talked before. You've said, all the gods, Judith's saying is, I don't have any use for them, or something even stronger. But actually, I think that this battle, the Trojan War, it's the battle to recover yourself. And the different gods, or the different parts of the battle, are the different parts of our personality. And they're all actually trying to do what's right. The different parts of who we are. We've been given these different parts, but they're playing these roles that and it's not anyone's fault, other than you could say it's the way we structured society is creating these problems for people. It's not your parents' fault. Gabor Mate always stresses this. They're doing the best they can in this traumatic society that we've got. If if someone had a drinking problem, they were traumatized too.
Yeah, of course.
And they probably had economic trauma, and it's getting more economically traumatic. And it's harder for children to be raised in a non-traumatic setting, harder and harder the more we make a more traumatic society. So with that battle, those figures in the Iliad, those different parts of who you are. I use the metaphor of a basketball team because of like the basketball team that they showed with the Michael Jordan. There was a recent series with Michael Jordan, this championship team with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, these different characters. They all have these very different personalities and different strengths, and they're all necessary on the team. But without that, they had this coach, Phil Jackson, who knew exactly how to bring out the best in each one. And he knew that Dennis Rodman needs to just go party sometimes. And a different coach would try and restrain that. But Phil Jackson is like, well, I know Dennis, and I know he'll be back, and I need his rebounding skill, and I need him this way. But you can't expect Scottie Pippen personality out of Dennis Rodman, and you can't expect vice versa. And Michael Jordan, they all need to be balanced, but they've got this perfect role to play. And if they do, this team can reach its highest potential. But that's going on in our brains. We all have these different figures, but in trauma, they've locked the coach under the court. They've buried him. And now they're trying to run the team, and they're all trying to do their best. But Rodman is yelling at Pippen, is yelling at Jordan, because the coach isn't there. And that's what's going on. And that's what's going on in the Trojan War. When the Achilles figure withdraws, or in Arjun withdraws, we always have these figures withdrawing, or in some cases getting buried. The god who is buried, Osiris, is buried. And then Isis has to look all over for him, and it's hard work. Or Inanna, the goddess, is buried, and everyone has to mourn for her to bring her back. But that's your higher self. If you don't even know your higher self has been buried, you've got to work to get it back. First, you've got to realize what a tragedy it is that your higher self has been buried, and recognize that. Then you have to bring it back. You have to work to bring it back and bring the coach back, because the coach will put the team. And then the players can all breathe a sigh of relief and say, oh, I don't have to be the coach anymore. Jordan can just concentrate on being Jordan instead of trying to be Jordan and the coach. And Rodman and Pippen, they can stop yelling at each other, and the coach can, and that's when your self shows up, and those parts start to trust, but it takes work. And these disciplines like yoga or breathing exercises or meditation, I believe, are ancient disciplines to help us to recover that self and to trust it and to let go. Because the players don't want to let go until then they see, oh, self can actually do this. Okay, I'll let go. And that's so Know Thyself was at the temple at Delphi, where you go to hear the voice of the gods, tells you, know thyself. And Plato, in one of his dialogues, is actually asked about the myths. It's I think it's the Timaeus. He's walking along the river and his companion says, oh, this might be where the wind god swept up that maiden and took her away with him. Isn't this where that tree is right there? Isn't that where this might have happened? And Plato says, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time trying to figure out where this or that myth happened. But I don't bother with that. I think they're just wasting their time. I still haven't figured out how to know myself, like it says at the Oracle of Delphi. Mm-hmm. That's a really powerful clue. Plato is saying the myths are not about a specific place. Don't take them literally. They're about know thyself. I think that little passage, I think it's in the Timaeus. You can find it in one of Plato's dialogues. It's specifically talking about the myths and know thyself. And that's what I think Plato is giving us a big hint. The myths are pointing you towards know yourself. And you'll mess up if you take them literally. And you said it's sad that people take them literally. Or why doesn't anyone explain the Iliad this way? Because we've lost that whole language, the connection to the stars. I've been talking about it. That's why, you're doing this podcast is wonderful, that this is, this message is, I'm trying to get this message out. It's like the myths are speaking this language, but if we don't listen to them in that language, we won't hear what they're trying to say, or we'll get a message, but we might get the wrong message.
Do you think there is a possibility that they presented it to us in a slightly complicated way, because they felt it's dangerous? I mean, come on, for the puppet masters, they are not interested that we figure out who we are and act accordingly. Do you think that is why they veiled it, or?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I say that a lot because all I can really show, Judith, is that the myths are based on the stars. Now, what it means, I've got opinions about. I just gave a bunch of opinions, and I think there's evidence, like that passage from Plato I quoted, to support that interpretation. How did this knowledge get lost? Again, all I can show is that the myths are based on the stars. Who did this? What was their purpose? Were they doing it for bad purpose or good purpose? I talk about that a lot, and I just happen to have myth and trauma here. I do delve into that because are the myths, tools of the puppet masters to control us? I think my cat just knocked something over. Are tools of the puppet masters to control us, or are they tools to? In myth and trauma, I wrestle with that a little bit, and I believe that they are for beneficial purposes, but it's quite possible that this system was lost long before ancient Egypt. I call it the very, very ancient wisdom, like the really, really ancient wisdom, like Göbekli Tepe time frame. We've only recently uncovered Göbekli Tepe, and it was deliberately buried no later than 8,000 BC or BCE, if you prefer, whichever. Yeah. If it was buried 10,500 years ago, that means, classical Egypt was after 3000 BC. So it was like 5,000, 6,000 years before the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are only 4,000 years before us. So this was way more ancient. This was more ancient to the Egyptians than they are to us. So I think this
Although
system,
I think ancient Egypt is much, much older than we usually think.
Well, yes. And actually, I just, I just was on this trip, you asked about this trip, and I was there with the Brothers of the Serpent podcast and the Grimerica podcast. Those teams were organizing this trip. Randall Carlson, who was talking about the cataclysmic floods, was on this trip, and the comet impact, which may have, this story of some lost knowledge may have to do with a cataclysm. I think it does. You know, the Younger Dryas impact theory, possibly fragments going into the sun, making, you know, solar outbursts. Surface of the earth might have even been radioactive. But some of those artifacts in ancient Egypt. So who else was there was Ben from Uncharted X. This is a great channel. I just did a podcast or a blog about it. And he is showing these, you know, stone jars in Egypt that it's very likely that what we think of as classical Egypt or dynastic Egypt found these things, because they are, it's like the hieroglyphs were carved onto them later with tools that were much less precise than whatever made these jars. These jars, I'm not even sure with modern lathe equipment, we could do some of the jars that, and some of the symmetry and some of the faces on some of these statues, so symmetrical. And over again, they have the almost like picture perfect, identical. You can map it with a laser scanner and it's the same. How are they doing that with just what we think that the dynastic Egyptians had? So it's very likely that they were inheritors, and they said themselves, they speak themselves. John Anthony West talks about this in Serpent in the Sky. I've got that right here somewhere to hold up. But you're right. So there was something, because this system is already in place in the oldest texts from Mesopotamia of Gilgamesh, the oldest texts from Egypt, the pyramid texts. It's already, the system's already in place. So you're right. It's something much, much earlier. So when you ask, could they just be keeping it from us? I'm inclined to believe that the original purpose was positive for reasons like the Solomon story. What do you go to the invisible realm for? To help others, for wisdom, not for what Midas did, not for what Paris did. You can use it for that, but it's going to lead to disaster. So when it has that message. It doesn't say, go to the invisible realm in order to oppress people. It actually says, you know, for selfish reasons, it's going to lead to disaster. For helping others is what it's for. But I think it was lost before the dynastic Egyptians. Certainly the ancient cultures seem to have had a better handle on it than we do today. They were closer to it. But when the original system was destroyed or lost, may have even been well before the dynastic Egyptians, well before the Greeks. They had a piece of it, and they had some of the ancient wisdom, but the very, very ancient wisdom might have already been lost. So they were maybe still trying to piece it together. But then I think another group came along that were actually trying to just use it for themselves, what you referred to like puppet masters, that then said, hey, this Kung Fu is pretty helpful. If we want, why don't we just get rid of all the other Kung Fu teachers and we'll be the only ones who know Kung Fu? That's what I think happened. And that's why I think this knowledge is no longer widely known. Now, it may have been put into this system also to hide it, to keep it secret, because it is, you know, esoteric, and maybe that's a way that it can't get killed off as easily. You know, if you have it out in the open and then, you know, your Game of Thrones kingdom gets killed by another Game of Thrones kingdom and everyone gets killed, then it's over. But if you put it in this kind of a system, it can last forever. So maybe that is also part of the story. It's a great question, though. I don't know if is that a satisfactory answer? Is that a helpful answer?
Yeah,
that's the best I can do.
You can't tell me what you don't know. It might have been that during your research you stumbled on that, and yeah. So
I haven't figured it all out. I'm still groping myself.
Yeah,
but for sure, it's for sure it's there.
For more than 2 hours.
I'll let you go.
Yeah, it's I was thinking I let you go, but okay,
I really enjoy it.
Go.
Yes, we'll let each other go. I really enjoy your questions, Judith. I appreciate your having me back on. Whatever the original purpose was, I hope that this message is positive, you know, for others. I believe that it's had a very positive impact on me, and I believe that this message is something that we need, right now today on an individual level and on a wider level, like we were talking about, because there is trauma.
Yeah.
And some people aren't trying to heal it. Some people are trying to inflict it, but
Mm.
others are trying to heal it. And I believe that the ancient myths are a resource. They are telling us how to know thyself. I really believe that.
Yeah. Excellent final words. So that was it, guys. Night Flight for today with the wonderful David Mathisen. And we hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we see you all next time. Stay safe and sound out there and have a great time. And we are on the other side.
Thanks, Judith. Yeah, the presentation doesn't let you get your questions in, so I wanted to let you ask some questions at the end.
No. That was okay. I was really, yeah, but here the 19 constellations, and here mother having 19 children. I thought,
Yeah.
not 17,
Could be.
20
Yeah,
children. No,
could
19.
be. It's very, very interesting. That part of the sky is very, very important. And I think that the Milky Way, that's the path towards reconnection with the higher self. And the zodiac is kind of the path of, like the spin cycle on your washing machine. It's the path of just going around in circles over and over and over again. And the Milky Way is the path to reconnection.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. That's why I think they use this code, so they can kind of say that.
I would love to go to a hairdresser.
Oh, they don't have it open there? It's open here.
If I want to go,
Yeah.
I have to do a PCR test, and then
Are you
I am
kidding?
allowed to sit with a face diaper.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
but I
PCR
have
test to go to a salon?
Otherwise, you you cannot enter. And since they are stupid enough to go along with it, to hell with them. Now they
Yeah.
are complaining that income broke in by 80%. Yeah, since the PCR tests, you have to show a negative PCR test. You know what? If you play along with that bullshit, to hell with you. Go bankrupt. I don't care.
Man, that is amazing, because the PCR test obviously has false positive,
Up to
some
90
huge,
for 95%. Yeah.
of the positives are false positives. So
Yeah.
you're just asking to get labeled as a positive if you have to take a PCR test just to get a hair appointment.
Yeah.
That's awful. I'm appalled. But we're not that bad. I mean, it's still ridiculous around here, but I was just on a trip with 50 people and nobody was wearing masks. We were just out having a good time.
Yeah.
But
as it should be.
And 2 weeks or 3 weeks before that, we had another one with 50 people, and we were doing breathing exercises in a room, doing breathing exercises led by a Wim Hof, the cold.
I know it.
We're doing Wim Hof breath work. It was fantastic. I think that's another way to get in touch with your higher self. So
yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll look forward to seeing it. I will promote it on my blog once you send me the video. I guess probably let me know if you need anything from me.
Yeah, I have all the information still from our previous interviews, and in case I can't remember, then I can look it up there.
Yeah, I should get a screenshot that I can put it on my Instagram of us.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get. Let me take a screenshot. I don't know if that worked or not, but anyway, what is it?
No.
Control. It didn't. No. Okay. Well, anyway, are you on Instagram? Do you use Instagram?
No. The YouTube.
You boycott all that stuff. Yeah. I agree. They're all terrible.
Yeah.
They're all terrible. But to promote my books and get my information out there, I put it on Facebook
yeah,
and
I can
Instagram
understand that, but
and YouTube.
I was
YouTube
never,
has taken down some of mine too.
I was that close from being deleted
Yeah,
on YouTube. Yeah.
it's if, like you said, if people can't see what's going on, then they're
Yeah.
not paying attention, or they're
Exactly.
willfully blinding themselves.
Willful ignorance.
That's what it is. All right, it was so nice to talk to you, Judith. Have a good night. I know it's late there
Okay.
too.
Thanks a
Nice to
lot. Bye
see you.
bye.
Bye.